Welcome back, everyone. I decided to create a new version of this controversy series that I started after I made the original Altoona Mafia video, and then started to receive feedback, both good and bad. Some of it was just crazy. A few individuals took issue with me talking about Mafia events in Altoona. I get it for the most part. The Mafia wannabe threats were kind of ridiculous, but for the most part, I understand why people had issues with it. People were hurt, families were ruined, and then I brought it all back up again 44 years later. But I recently watched the movie The Irishman and realized that it was actually about the Bufalino Mafia family in Pittston, Pennsylvania. That movie is 7 years old, and even though I love Mafia movies, I never saw it somehow. I thought it was really good, if not for the reproductions of that era alone. So I started researching the characters involved and discovered that Joe Pesci was playing the northeastern Pennsylvania boss, Russell Bufalino. Harvey Keitel was playing the Philadelphia boss, Angelo Bruno, and Ray Romano played Russell's cousin and Jimmy Hoffa's attorney, William Bufalino. De Niro played Frank Sheeran, basically a hitman for the Bufalino family. After researching their addresses from the 1920s on, I discovered that many of the places still exist. One of Russell's earliest homes in Pittston, Hoffa's attorney lived 2 houses down from Russell, and he eventually opened a law practice there. As I was driving away, I happened to notice that William's law office writing was still in the window, which is fascinating that this history is still there. It was interesting to see that they changed the name of the street from Railroad Street to Columbus Avenue. Many people suggested that this was intentional due to the bad reputation that section of Railroad Street had. Allegedly, this section of Railroad Street was referred to as Murder Street due to all the killings there. I did start to dig into this for a follow-up and found many assaults and murders in that area. But after researching the Bufalino family, I decided to drive to Pittston, West Pittston, and Kingston, Pennsylvania to find this Bufalino Mafia history. The Mafia boss Russell Bufalino, who was played by Pesci in The Irishman, his house is still standing in Kingston. It's not what you expect for a Mafia boss's house. I would never have guessed the leader of the Northeast Pennsylvania Mafia, the guy that most likely okayed the hit on Jimmy Hoffa, lived in this small house. I figured the history of this place was lost to time and nobody had any idea what this house was. But I soon realized that I was wrong in this case after I was contacted by the current owner. More on that in a second, but this is the case for many places that I have found. And current owners typically reach out to me for more information indicating that they had no idea. One of my favorite discoveries like this is when I found the location of a B-24 bomber that went down in 1944 after a test run at Olmsted Airfield in Middletown, PA. The bomber went down with 2 pilots on board, but a civilian electrician strapped on a parachute he was never trained to use and jumped out of the bay door. That farm is almost unrecognizable in the middle of a development now. But this led me to meeting the people who live at the farm and the people who live where the plane crashed and scattered into pieces. Even more fascinating was I was introduced to a man that witnessed this crash occur, and he still lives on his family's property where he watched the plane go down when he was 12. That is the reason I do this. That video is called The Year the Planes Fell from the Sky in York County, Pennsylvania. I will leave a link below if you want to see it. But anyhow, when I was in Pittston, it reminded me of my hometown, Altoona. Pittston was an early immigrant, largely Italian and Irish area that were drawn to this location for coal mines. And just like after creating my Altoona Mafia video, I started to get many comments and feedback after releasing my video, and people were angry, but not for what I thought it would be. My video wasn't even about Wilkes-Barre, but I did reference it several times, and apparently I said it completely wrong. Maybe. One commenter gave the history of the place, which indicates that the place is named after 2 British men, John Wilkes and Isaac Barry. Barry's name has a so-called acute accent, which is pronounced A, versus the grave accent that is pronounced like the word fed. But this is America. We will say 2 British dudes' names the way we want. But here's a chart after adding up all the ways that the locals said was the correct way to say it. But like I said, I wasn't even talking about Wilkes-Barre, or was I? What is going on up there with Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Pittston, Kingston? Is it not all the same place? That place is weird. But all joking aside, what I mainly got from people up there was help and collaboration. I reached out to Joe Bufalino before putting my video together. A really good guy. All of this history was passed down to him. He allowed me to use a few photos from his collection, and I want to correct that I requested permission to use a photo from a Facebook group, and it turns out that this photo also originated with Joe Bufalino, not that Facebook group, as I indicated in the video. But I also made contact with Eric Loomis, who has a great podcast and is working with Joe Bufalino to release a documentary about the Bufalino history later this year. I'm definitely looking forward to that, and we are trying to coordinate some time for us to collaborate, so definitely stay tuned for that one. I will keep you posted on my channels. A few more corrections. Appalachian, New York is pronounced differently than the Appalachian Trail, at least according to family of mine that live in that area. But talking about Russell Bufalino's house in Kingston, a member of the D'Elia family currently lives there. He reached out to me to discuss the history of the house, but it sounds like there is some controversy surrounding who took over Russell Bufalino's place as boss after he passed away. Some sources indicate that it was William D'Elia that took over as the boss after Russell passed. William was initially listed as a driver for Russell, and it appears that he became sort of a son to Russell since he didn't have any biological children. But the Pennsylvania Crime Commission at that time alluded to D'Elia possibly taking over Bufalino's operations, but we know they didn't get everything right about the La Rocca and Varilla crew information. But there is another side to this that said there's no way William could have been the replacement for Russell Bufalino. In 2020, D'Elia worked with investigative journalist Matt Burbeck, who interviewed him from a book he eventually wrote called The Life We Chose. I haven't read the book yet, but I listened to a few interviews with Burbeck where he talks about the book and interviewing D'Elia. Apparently, Russell's wife willed the house of D'Elia, and he moved back into it. Burbeck stated that he interviewed D'Elia in the house and has preserved the way Bufalino left it, almost like a museum. That's pretty cool. But talking to the family member living there now, he was very helpful and had no problem with me creeping around the house and flying my drone over for my video. Seriously, almost everyone I had contact with up there was very positive and willing to help out and appreciated my search into this history. But even cooler was the fact that Joe Bufalino and Eric Loomis were very encouraging to the point that they offered to help with anything I needed and were open to collaboration. Unfortunately, that is rare in the content creation world, really just in the world we live today, so thank you, Joe and Eric. One other person that reached out to me was another Bufalino family member, Charles Bufalino. He wrote the book Revelations of a Mafia Family, the Teamsters, and the Final Resting Place of Jimmy Hoffa. The book has been in my car for a while, and I plan to read it soon, but Charles actually owns 47 Railroad Street, Jimmy Hoffa's attorney, William Bufalino's childhood home and law office. He shared some fascinating information about William's office, some crazy Hoffa stuff there when he took it over. I'm not sure how much of this he wants to put out there, so more on that after I discuss this with him further. I am just so glad to see that the William Bufalino side of this is being preserved by Charles, and the Russell Bufalino side of this is being preserved by Joe, Eric, and D'Elia. I'm not even going to talk about the crazy stuff that Joe has. We will have to wait for the documentary release, but it solidifies some of the theories that were floating around about Russell's influence in the mafia, pop culture, and Jimmy Hoffa. So definitely look for that towards the end of the summer. When I was in Pittston working on my Bufalino video, I remembered an old article indicating that Russell Bufalino liked to eat prosciutto bread. I've never heard of that before, so I looked it up. That looks delicious. My plan was to attempt to find prosciutto bread when I was in Pittston, but I ran out of time. If anyone can suggest the best place to get prosciutto bread the next time in town, please let me know in the comments. But some of the comments I got from people definitely led me down a rabbit hole. Some actually said that they heard stories that Hoffa would visit the area to talk to his attorney, William. I couldn't find any evidence of that. The closest I found Hoffa to that area was when he was locked up in Lewisburg Federal Prison from 1967 to December of 1971. That is only an hour and 23 minutes away from Pittston, but I did hear that William would visit Hoffa during this time. I tried to figure this same thing out with Altoona because there were theories that Hoffa might have visited La Rocca family soldier Mike Trafficani's farm in the mountains outside of Altoona. Some of the stories supporting this include statements from Trafficani's family and associates indicating that Trafficani would hold mafia hunting trips and meetings at his secluded farm. Then you have the Hoffa movie itself showing a scene with Hoffa and mafia members hunting in Pennsylvania. I've been trying to figure out where that scene originated with no luck so far. What I did find was that the mobster that Hoffa was hunting with in the movie was a fictional boss named Carol D'Alessandro, who was allegedly a composite of a Detroit mafia figure and New Jersey mob boss Anthony Provenzano. The closest I could find Hoffa to Altoona was an article indicating that Hoffa was in court in Ebensburg during his Lewisburg time. But I don't know. It seems more likely that Hoffa would have been hunting in the Pittston area than Altoona, considering his attorney William was married to the niece of Detroit mafia boss Angelo Melli, and William lived in Detroit when he wasn't visiting or conducting business back in the Pittston area. But that's it for this episode. Comment if you'd like me to continue this series on northeastern Pennsylvania, and see you in the next episode.